In this presentation, you will learn about feminist critique in sociology. Feminism attempts to comprehend women's social situation, explain their secondary role in history, and provide a foundation for reform and development. Feminists think that men and women are in a fundamental power struggle. This fight is potentially revolutionary since it revolves around class and race too. A Vindication of the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft claimed that women should have the same legal rights as men because of their equal humanity, moral value, rationality, and independence. It was wrong for women to be defined solely by their gender, with educational, legal, economic, and political rights restricted to them. There would be a change in the relationship if equality was achieved. Waves of feminism. Let us now look into understanding the different waves of feminism. There have been several waves. Diverse kinds of intervention describe the first wave of feminism in the United States, and they have continued to inspire succeeding feminist groups. The first wave of feminism in the United States was initially intertwined with other reform movements such as abolition and temperance and heavily engaged working class women. It was, however, backed by black women abolitionists like Maria Stewart, Sojourner Truth, and Frances E. W. Harper, who fought for women's rights. Women's rights suffered a significant backlash during World War I and World War II as the focus shifted to calls for national unity and patriotism. Women's radical otherness, or rather the cognitive and social process of othering women as the second sex in patriarchal cultures, was presented by writers like Woolf and Beauvoir. Marxist feminism shared a fundamental conviction of inequality and opportunity for men and women. Still, the latter focused on working class women and their participation in class struggle and social movements. Socialist feminists such as Rosa Luxemburg and in particular Alexandra Kollontai and Emma Goldman paved the way for second wave feminism, fighting for women's rights to abortion, divorce, and non-legislative partnerships, as well as against sexism in bourgeois society and within socialist movements, both politically and in their personal lives. Second wave feminism refers to the radical feminism of the late 1960s and early 1970s women's liberation movement. The second wave feminism, with the earliest harbinger of three waves of feminism and the most widely known event in the United States, the Miss America pageant protests of 1968 and 69. Radical second wave feminists employed performance to draw attention to what was now referred to as women's oppression. Red Stockings, the New York Radical Feminists, and other significant feminist groups participated in the 1969 protest to demonstrate how women in pageant competitions were paraded like cattle, highlighting the underlying assumption that how women look is more important than what they do, what they think, or even whether they think at all. It was a flawlessly planned press conference. A small group of women purchased pageant tickets. It was pasted in a banner that said Women's Liberation, chanting Freedom for Women and No More Miss America, thereby exposing the public to an early second wave feminist objective. Feminists staged several types of theatrical activism while marching down the Atlantic City boardwalk and close to the event itself, including crowning a sheep Miss America and throwing oppressive gender artifacts like bras, girdles, false eyelashes, high heels, and makeup into a trash can in front of reporters. The desire to build a feminist theory and politics that honors conflicting experiences and deconstructs categorical thinking motivates third wave feminists. Intersectionality and feminism. The Oxford Dictionary meaning of the word intersectionality is The interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. This word was first used in women's rights by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989 to show how the problem is not the same for all women. For example, a Dalit woman would face problems of caste discrimination, class discrimination. However, a woman from a tribe would face different layers of marginalization. Bringing out the intersectional aspect in literature is very important. In conclusion to this, we need to understand what intersectionality is, where different forms are accepted and the versions of inequality are different. Feminism in India. Anagol shows that the development of feminist consciousness in India from the late 19th century to the coming of Gandhi was not one of uninterrupted unilinear progression. Her study of women's perspectives and participation in the Age of Consent Bill debates and demonstrates how the rebellion of wives and their assertion in the colonial courts had resulted in men to reform rather than the current historiographical accounts, which claim that it was a response purely to threats posed by colonial masculinity. She adds that the growth of the women's press, their writings and participation in the wider vernacular press highlights the relationship between symbolic or hidden resistance and open assertion by women. Feminist critique of social structure. In colonial Maharashtra, women tried to express themselves and to society through biographies, autobiographies, articles in newspapers and journals. At times, they even wrote books trying to discuss women's issues that arose from the patriarchal system of society at the time. These writings criticize social customs and blind faith in religion about women. Writings were theoretical and visionary and stood out, creating a baseline for feminist historiography. One such work is that of Tarabai Shinde called Stri Purish Tulna. Let us now look into a few present day Indian feminist women who have created an impact on thousands of people. Vandana Shiva is an eco-rights activist who founded Navdanya, a national movement to conserve the diversity and integrity of living resources, particularly native seeds, after her battle against genetically modified seeds and for the conservation of native seeds. Navdanya has established 122 community seed banks. Farmers have also been taught about seed sovereignty, food sovereignty, and sustainable agriculture through the organization. Indira Jaisingh, a lawyer and human rights activist, has been named formidable, particularly while recalling her work to develop the Domestic Violence Act 2005. Indira is also the Lawyers Collective's founder, which works to get justice for marginalized groups. Indira was the first woman to be appointed to the Bombay High Court as senior counsel. She has taken on environmental concerns such as coastal conservation and others, and women's issues and human rights. She headed committees in Punjab to examine extrajudicial executions, police brutality, and disappearances in North India in the 1970s and 80s. She has battled some of the country's most high profile cases. She has also battled for compensation for victims of the Bhopal gas catastrophe in 1984 and the Gujarat riots in 2002. Rinda Grover is a human rights lawyer and activist. She has worked on several high profile cases, including the rape torture case of Soni Sori, the 1984 anti Sikh riots, the 1987 Hashimpura police killings, the 2004 Ishrat Jahan case, the 2008 anti Christian riots in Khandhamal. She has also taken on issues concerning domestic violence and minorities. The Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act of 2012, and the Prevention of Torture Bill of 2010 were all drafted with Brinda's input. She opposes the two-finger test and criticizes the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the death penalty, and other issues. Vijay Penkutu is a Kerala-based human rights and women's rights activist. Her involvement in the Kozhikode right to sit struggle for the use of the restroom or to sit during working hours, which were denied to women working in stores and malls of Midyaretiri Sesam Street. Vijay founded Penkutu, an all-trade women's union, to fight for the fundamental rights of saleswomen in Kozhikode and other regions of Kerala, where similar atrocities against working women are common. After an 8-year fight, the Kerala Shops and Commercial Establishments Amendments Act 2018 allowed women to work flexible hours and have a space to sit. Kamila Basin is a social scientist who works as a development feminist, author, poet, and activist. She has worked on gender equality, education, poverty reduction, human rights, and peace in South Asia since 1970. In 1979, she began working with the food and agricultural organizations Freedom from Hunger Campaign in New Delhi, where she campaigned to empower underprivileged people in rural and urban areas. She's written extensively about patriarchy and gender issues. Her published publications are Laughing Matters, Exploring Masculinity, Borders and Boundaries, Women in India's Partition, What is Patriarchy, and Feminism and its Relevance in South Asia. Gail Omwet was born in Minneapolis in the United States. She stayed in India and wrote about India too. She first came to India to research her doctoral thesis on the non-Brahmin movement in Western India, which men like Mahatma Jyotiba Phule inspired. Her primary areas of interest were on the writings and philosophies of Jyotiba Phule and Dr. Ambedkar. She brought them to wide public consciousness, especially in the 1970s when social activism rose. In many ways, she was the voice of the Dalit community at a time when their struggle had not yet received public validation. Her work was almost all encompassing, covering caste, class, gender, economics, tribal issues, and socio agricultural matters, especially rural women. Her notable works are Cultural Revolt in a Colonial Society, the Non-Brahmin Movement in Western India, Ambedkar Towards an Enlightened India, Jyotirao Phule and the Ideology of Social Revolution in India, Dalit and the Democratic Revolution, Dr. Ambedkar and the Dalit Movement in Colonial India, Understanding Caste from Buddha to Ambedkar and Beyond, We Will Smash This Prison, Indian Women in Struggle, Seeking Begumpura, the social vision of anti-caste intellectuals, and Buddhism in India, challenging Brahmanism and caste. We Will Smash This Prison was a powerful recollection of her involvement, along with Indutai Patankar, the veteran communist leader, and her mother-in-law, in the movement for women's rights in India. Gail Ombet and her husband, Bharat Patankar, founded the Shramik Mukti Dal in 1980 and other activists to organize farmers and peasants. The socio-political organization incorporated communist thought along with the liberating principles proposed by Jyotiba Phule and Dr. Ambedkar. Thus, they dealt with several key issues like water rights, caste oppression, rights of those affected by infrastructure projects, etc. She was even at the forefront of public protest, Padyatra rallies, and conferences addressing people in Marathi. Gail Omwet passed away recently. Importance of learning a feminist critique. Documenting will help the other generation know the past and take further steps in the direction of growth. It would further help sensitize and learn about the facets of oppression that anyone would be passively going through in their lives. Understanding feminist critique. Anne Oakley defined gender where she notes sex refers to biological division into male and female, gender to the parallel and socially unequal division into femininity and masculinity, Feminists point out that gender training differs in different parts of the world and gender is a construction of society. Strawson notes that the radical message of feminism is not the recognition of equality or just a measure of equalization of fairness, but it is a part of a larger struggle for social change. Anne Oakley's book, titled The Sociology of Housework, is an important work that brings out several aspects of the private sphere that is home. In this book, she discusses stay at home mothers who contribute immensely to the household. She points out the gender inequality in housework. Feminist critique is an important method for examining prior knowledge for androcentric and ethnocentric bias in all aspects of knowledge development, from theoretical underpinnings through the steps of the research process. Feminist research. It needs to be observed that feminist critique is often portrayed as an important method for examining prior knowledge for androcentric and ethnocentric bias in the theoretical underpinnings and even throughout different research steps. Despite proliferation of research on women, the male bias remains prevalent in the scientific community. The problem in research operates twofold, not being a participant in the research and being a researcher just because the person is a female. Feminist critique of museum. Thousands of diverse museums, including art galleries and heritage sites, exist around the world today. They draw millions of people, audiences who come to view the exhibitions and artifacts and learn about them. This makes museums active public educators who imagine, visualize, represent, and story the past and the present to create knowledge. The visuals and narratives used to inform visitors are never neutral. Feminist cultural and adult education studies have shown that all too frequently they include epistemologies of mastery that reify the histories and deeds of great men. Despite pressures from feminist scholars and professionals, normative public museums. Feminist criticism of archaeology. The archaeology of gender and feminist archaeology critique is the representation of gender, sex, and sexuality. It challenges traditional constructions of archaeological knowledge and the role of archaeology in present day society. It also uses the material culture from the past. This is done to understand gender and sexuality and how they were constructed, maintained, changed, negotiated, and resisted through social relations, roles, and ideologies. In addition, feminist archaeology is concerned with contemporary practice, pedagogy, cultural heritage management, past presentation, and working with local communities. Critique of education. Schools have become cultural sites of the reproduction of masculinities and gender roles. At times, even the policymakers or the management of the school are involved in this process. It is through the uniform which is given to the girls, the textbooks and narratives which are taught to the children. All these contribute in the construction of the persona of the child and their self-esteem. Suppose schools have strict policies where children are not supposed to interact with the opposite gender, they will have problems in adulthood interacting and communicating with other genders. Women have been marginalized based on biology. Biology is seen not merely as a privileged oppressor of women, but as a co-victim of masculinist social assumptions. When gender biases are controlled, the fertility rate improves. Feminist critique in literature. Literature reflects and shapes prejudices and other cultural preconceptions according to feminist literary criticism. As a result, it explores how works of literature represent or subvert patriarchal views, often in the same work. Some of the most common feminist literary critique techniques are identifying with female characters. Critics question writers' male-centered perspectives by scrutinizing how female characters are defined. Women in literature have historically been portrayed as objects from a male perspective, according to feminist literary critique. Re-evaluating literature and the context in which it is read. By reviewing classic literature, a critic might ask if society has appreciated male authors and their literary works more than female authors because males have been valued more than females. The ultimate goal of feminist criticism in literature, according to Tuttle, is to develop and uncover a female tradition of writing, to analyze women writers and their writings from a female perspective, to rediscover old texts, to interpret the symbolism of women's writing so that it will not be lost or ignored by the male point of view, to resist sexism in literature and to increase awareness of sexism in literature. Digitalization and marginalization of women. Technology has questioned the binary relations of males and females. Technology as a non-human agency has brought several changes in human lives. Gurumurthy et al. Points out that the development of girl child and protection of women's schemes have been marginalized further due to digitalization. The Union budget of 2015-16 revealed that the budget for women and child has been reduced by one-third compared to the previous years. It is also observed that fundings for schemes like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme have been reduced, even though such schemes directly help the poor women. The focus is on digitalization rather than ground level development. However, new strategies like direct benefit transfers have been started. Support for health, education, food security, and childcare is replaced with more efficient cash transfers based on technological restructuring of governance. The only structural solution to the ills of poor governance is that of the introduction of technology. Evidence on the ground shows, contrary to the hope that technology will reduce the layers of intermediaries, it has instead increased the number of intermediaries involved in payments, often with complex processes that make the payment process more opaque than in a purely bureaucratic mechanism. The privatization of social security has gendered impacts. Existing studies reveal that the assumption of an automatic link between cash transfers and women's empowerment can be misleading. In many instances, cash transfers may reinforce traditional gender roles and also leave intra-household gender inequalities untouched. Thank you for watching the presentation.